Does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. This amendment would strike a provision in the bill that prohibits the nation's ICBM fleet from falling below its current size of 400. In 2014, the Obama administration decided to reduce the ICBM fleet to 400 missiles to comply with the New START treaty. Ever since 2016, the Congress has included provisions in the Defense Authorization Bill to effectively prohibit any further reduction. The reason is simple. Nuclear threats are growing. In fact, just this year, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command notified Congress that China now possesses more ICBM launchers than the United States. Now is not the time to be considering cuts to our ICBM fleet, which remains central to our deterrent. I want to quote former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Hyten, who many of us know and respect. When asked specifically about reducing the ICBM force, he replied, quote, "I don't understand how, with the threats that we face today, which are growing, not shrinking, we would make a decision today as a nation to lessen our overall strategic deterrent. That makes no sense to me, and my best military advice is that we do not do that." Close quote. I urge all members to oppose the amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Just to be clear, this amendment does not change the size of our nuclear forces. It merely allows for reasonable consideration and debate in the future, especially around de-escalation. Again, our history shows during the Cold War it was critical. With that, I would like to yield 1 minute to my good colleague, Congressman from Oregon.
I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy and her leadership on this issue. We have more than we need to have a credible deterrent. More than we need. This small but important amendment would allow the military leadership to evaluate how to evolve the needs. The land-based nuclear ICBMs are far in excess of what we need, and we've been seeing scandal in the papers in terms of the management of them, drug use, cheating on tests, and they are not necessary for our security. There's no security benefit in this sort of redundancy. We ought to at least be able to examine the path going forward. Locking in to 400 permanently is lunatic. It's expensive and it's dangerous. As anybody who's read, for example, Eric Schlosser's book, Command and Control, to see how close we've come to nuclear disaster with this stockpile. The record is not very rosy. We at least ought to allow our military leadership to evaluate what we need to do going forward. Thank you, and I yield back.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the Chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, Mr. Lambert of Colorado.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I also rise in strong opposition to this amendment. The chairman is right. Now is not the time to open the door to cutting the ICBM fleet. China's ICBM forces are rapidly expanding, and Russia's nuclear forces, the largest in the world, continue to grow as well. In the face of these growing threats, we need to strengthen our deterrent, not weaken it. Our ICBM forces continue to play a vital role in deterrence as the most responsive leg of our nuclear triad. Unlike submarines and bombers, land-based ICBMs are always ready to execute presidential orders and provide the day-to-day 24/7 deterrent that our nation relies on. They have prevented nuclear attack for 60 years. If you ever want to see nuclear proliferation in this world, start cutting our nuclear forces. All the countries that rely on us will attempt to secure their own nuclear capability. They'll have no other choice. That would destabilize the world. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman Alabama reserves.
How much time is remaining, sir?
45 seconds.
Chair.
45 seconds.
So I just want to be clear with my colleagues. This amendment gives our government more options that could avoid a world ending a nuclear war. It's that simple. It doesn't reduce. It doesn't increase. It literally allows for real consideration and debate and allows the President, the United States, Department of Defense to make those decisions. I mean, it's a common sense amendment, and I think it's incredibly important, especially, again, a time of watching what's going on in our world right now and what happened during the Cold War, for us to be able to de-escalate when needed, for us to be able to, again, make more thoughtful decisions, not based on this kind of scare tactic, let's do more, let's get this out there and everything, without actually considering some of the really important factors that are around these very, very dangerous, again, world-ending weapons that we have, that could end the nuclear war in our world. And so it's very, very important, again, to all my colleagues to understand this is not about reducing. This is about actually having more options. With that, I, again, urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This time I'd like to yield 1 minute to an outstanding member of the Armed Services Committee, General Don Bacon of Nebraska.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in strong opposition to this bill as someone who had nuclear command and control authorities when I was a general officer in the Air Force, someone who knows that nuclear and strategic deterrence is job number one for our military. Today, China is building a nuclear force to match ours and more modernized. Russia has a nuclear force today that matches ours in numbers and is more modernized. This is not the time to reduce. Former STRATCOM Commander Admiral Richards said the Chinese nuclear expansion is breathtaking, and it is. Today is the day that we got to be modernizing our forces, not talking about reducing them or cutting them down. I also want to point out that our ICBM force offers the highest rates of readiness and alert capabilities, and once they're put in, they're the cheapest to run, to operate. So with that, I urge a defeat of this amendment. Our country cannot afford it. Strategic deterrence can't afford it. Nuclear deterrence can't afford it. I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would strike common sense provision that has been consistent policy since 2016. I urge members to oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.